No deal on roads, the Democrats' first debate. There are micro what in the Great Lakes? And you know who is going to win this Saturday. Stay put. We have a full show ahead. My Week starts right now.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Keynote speaker is Tom Kelly, leader of a global design firm helping organizations innovate and grow. Motivational speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there, and welcome to My Week, the show that brings you analysis of the biggest stories that we are talking about in Michigan. We'll hit on the debate this week, a closer look at getting rid of plastics in the Great Lakes, and that big game coming up on Saturday. But we do get started in Lansing. You know, they were so close and yet so far away. If we all thought a roads deal was going to get done this fall, like all of our elected officials said it was, well, fooled again. According to the governor and the leadership late this week, they're at an impasse. The sticking point, an across-the-board income tax cut. So let's take a look at why this is a problem and bring in our My Week contributors, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press and Nolan Finley of the Detroit News. Guys, you know what? I have to say I was not shocked that there's not a roads deal right now. And I think, though, that most of the state is pretty angry that that there's not a deal. And I'm going to start with you, Nolan. What is going on?
You know, I talked to some of the principals Tuesday morning early before they went into this bargaining session, and they were all optimistic. You know, we're getting close. We get a little closer every day. And they mentioned, you know, here are the sticking points, which included the desire of the Republican caucus to give an income tax hike if there's a surplus. And they got in an hour later. They walked out, and the governor said it's an impasse. And I talked to one of the governor's guys beforehand. He said, well, he's getting very frustrated. He thinks it's past time to get a deal done, and he's tired of beating his head against the same issue. I suspect he was clearing the plate for his education plan, which he's going to drop next week, and he didn't want both out there.
Okay, now wait a minute. Before we even get to the education plan, we've been told all along that nothing is going to happen in the legislature unless this roads deal gets done. That it's going to be roads first and nothing else. And I'm really baffled as to why.
Well, so we're left with nothing else then, because I mean they're not going to get a roads deal at this point.
Can that really be an answer though at this point for everyone across the state of Michigan who, if they're feeling frustrated in Lansing, I got to tell you, frustrated may not even be the word that people in Michigan are feeling.
No, I think you're right. It's way beyond frustration, and it's also going to spill over now into the electoral season next year. You'll see this ballot initiative, I think, from the unions to raise corporate income taxes to pay for roads, which will be very divisive. I mean, I think we need to raise taxes to fix the roads. I think that particular proposal will split the state pretty evenly and bitterly over a question that we should be able to solve much easier. I mean, there have been lots of different ways that have come up to pay for this, spreading the burden of it around, you know, making sure that everybody pays something. It's just, I mean, it's baffling why it can't get done. But, you know, I would also say that this governor is getting frustrated with the legislature, not just on this issue. There have been some other things that he's expressed privately and some publicly about the sort of recalcitrance of this legislature, that legislature dominated by his own party. He can't convince them to do things that are on his agenda and make really good sense. And so I think there's a more sort of profound split that is going on here.
Is that true, Nolan, that he cannot convince his own party to do things? And where do you think the communication breakdown is, if that is indeed true?
Can't convince either party to do anything on roads, but I think you're seeing in a lot of ways the effects of term limits. Kevin Cotter, the House Speaker, this is his first time doing this in terms of negotiating a deal. They have had a signed agreement, the four quadrant leaders, the four legislative leaders, and the governor have had a signed deal for over a month, an agreement in principle on how to make the split. They can't get the caucuses to go along. They're fighting now over this idea of if there's a surplus, we're going to refund it in terms of an income tax rebate. The governor's saying, wait a minute, we've got the school plan, we've got the Medicaid hit that's going to be $200, $400, $600 million. Nobody seems to know. He's very worried about depleting the general fund, but it seems like such a silly thing to get hung up on. And I was in Lansing yesterday all day, and now people are starting to talk about, well, this will have to wait till lame duck next year, and the DPS stuff will have to wait. And that's incredible to think about.
Wow, and I think you have a lot of disappointment from people who watch this and say, wow, when Gamrat and Courser were under fire, we had all-night sessions. We had people staying up late, negotiating, really working very hard to deal on that situation.
That was because nobody could figure out how to make it work. I mean, you had a speaker who didn't understand that you don't bring something to the floor until you have enough votes to get it done. That's why the Courser Gamrat thing went all night that night. I mean, and again, it gets to this inexperience. I mean, there's nobody there who can say, well, you know, this is how this works. I've seen it before. I can manage it and get it through.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. When do you press the panic button and saying, we're never going to get a roads deal done? I mean, where's the drop dead?
It's going to end up on the ballot.
Since it was on the ballot and the voters turned it down, and then they said, we're going to, hang on, I'm talking. I'm still talking. And then the voters turned it down, and then you had leadership say, we're going to get something done within a month. Then you went to summer. Then they said, no, we're going to break for the summer. We're getting it done first thing when we come back in the beginning of the fall. So when do we finally say, okay, this is not going to happen?
Well, I don't know if you can ever say that because the need's too urgent. I think, you know, the governor may have been last week signaling to lawmakers that this is it. This is as far as I'm going. So, you know, you guys come along the rest of the way. This may have been a leverage move. You may see them come back next week and get a deal done. They've got to keep working on it. They can't walk away from the table.
You know, they throw out the amount, and I think everyone's still agreeing on the $1.2 billion. And it makes me think, is that still
probably low now?
I was going to say, is that still the correct amount?
It's all you're going to get.
Well, you know, the longer you wait, the more expensive it is. It's like anything else. If you wait to replace your roof till there's a 6-foot hole in it, it costs you more than if there's just a little leak. So, you know, I mean, we've been talking about this for 4 years now, the need to have more money to keep the roads in better shape and invest in better roads down the road. It's just we can't get there, and I do think that the governor's frustration is going to become sort of part of the narrative in Lansing, that his frustration with the legislature over a number of things. And, you know, if he thinks that moving this off the plate to put schools on it is somehow going to make it easier, that's a tougher issue to sell in the legislature. So, you know, it's not going to get better over that. I do think, though, this is going to end up on the ballot next year. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think the legislature... Why would they do it next year, though?
The legislature won't put it on the ballot. They're done with that. They've tried that and failed.
But you'll have an initiative,
well, if you can get an initiative up in that amount of time, if it's the income tax initiative, that's going to be a $30 million fight. I mean, that is going to be ridiculous. But if this thing isn't settled before we move into 2016 and that election campaign year, nothing's going to get done hard next year.
All right. Well, so talk a little bit about next week and what the governor's strategy would be, Nolan, in terms of coming to the legislature and now bringing out the Detroit Schools Plan, which we have talked so much about, and in terms of we had been waiting on that because we were waiting for roads to get done. How difficult now is this position for the governor?
Well, it's extraordinarily difficult because he needs $350 million from him, and that's probably not enough. I think some of the structural reforms in terms of reshaping how the Detroit public schools are governed and these sort of layers of oversight, you know, that shouldn't be that hard to get through. But when it comes down to the fact that we've got to have an appropriation for these schools, I don't see how he gets it.
What do you think?
I think selling this again as a fix for Detroit is going to be the problem, and I think for both the governor and the mayor, who now has his own plan that he wants in DPS, the strategies are going to have to be, what is this? why not put it in the context of the larger state problem? Lots of districts have the same issue that DPS is facing, and that's going to be the source of resentment if you say we're only going to do this in Detroit. I think you got to start talking about these long-term legacy obligations everywhere and fixing that in a way that helps everyone who has the problem. And it's not just poor districts like Detroit. Some wealthy districts are in this same bind.
But again, you're now talking about a huge amount of money when we can't get, the money we need for roads, and you've got these other issues coming up. I mean, this Medicaid problem is going to be massive, and they have no clue yet where that money is going to come from, and so
you got to raise it.
You can raise only so much from your citizens and from your businesses. I mean, we have dug ourselves in such a huge hole on so many different issues that it is going to be very painful to get out.
Back to the fact that they can't get the roads deal done. Nolan, let me ask you about in terms of trust and how people see Michigan's legislature now, what kind of trust they have in them to do their jobs, and does it lend more to your argument or, I guess, your push for a part-time legislature?
Oh, absolutely, and I think, we may not get that on the ballot in 2016 because of the challenges of getting it done that quickly, but, certainly by the 2018 election, we should have a ballot proposal on that says term limits are gone. This is a part-time legislature. We're going to focus their attention, make them more effective. I mean, they can come back here and say, we're going to dither on this all fall because there's no deadline. And, to have people in Lansing talking about lame duck session in 2016, that's when we're going to get a deal here.
That makes me ill.
By that time, what will our roads look
They
like?
won't get to a lame duck session in 2016. I really do believe that if they don't get this done this year in the regular session, you will see some sort of ballot initiative next year, maybe a couple of them.
Who's going to drive?
Well, I mean, I think the unions are talking about the corporate tax.
Well,
they'll put their money into that.
That's probably going to be on the ballot.
Yeah. Well, and that could inspire some other people to put things on the ballot. You could have dueling proposals to try to come up with this money.
And this is what happens when you have an ineffective legislature.
Well, it is.
You've got people trying to solve the problems through ballot initiatives.
All right, let's try to have a little bit of faith that a cooling off period might help these folks
They've had
out
a cooling
up there.
off period all summer.
I know.
I mean,
I know.
This is about, fundamental disconnects between the governor and the legislature. I don't know what
that you don't think can be fixed.
The separating issue is just like this. It is not.
But it's not about the issue. It is about ideology. Right. It is about belief, and those are things that you can't really negotiate. So
they want to be able to go to the voters and say, well, we raise your taxes here, we cut them here, and what you ought to be saying to voters is, look at our roads.
Raise your taxes and fix your roads.
Yeah, I think everyone.
I busted a tire, spent $400 or $500 on a tire. I mean, I'm sure that would have been more expensive than a gas station.
No one disagrees that it needs to get done. All right, turning now, the Democrats, hey, they finally had their first debate, but let's face it, it really was the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton show. Without Joe Biden in the race, she seemed to cement her front-runner status, and she scored some serious likability points. All right, so you guys watched on Tuesday night.
Did you?
I watched, and then I switched over to sports or whatever.
I'm just gonna say straight off, it's too long.
The Cubs were playing too.
It's too long of a.
It does go on.
It goes on very, very long.
An ordeal.
But I will have to say that my initial impression of it, just as a whole, is it's much easier to watch a debate with just 5 people on a stage. Yeah. You get to know the candidates a lot better, and you get to understand the issues where they stand on them, and you get better conversation when you have a smaller amount of people. So I think that's what Tuesday night showed me. What did it show you, Nolan?
Well, I mean, this was like sending Justin Verlander down to pitch to the Mud Hens, for crying out loud. This is not a serious field of contenders. There's one person on that stage right now who has a chance to get the nomination to be president, and I think Bernie Sanders confirmed that when he let her off the hook on the email question and refused to go after her on her biggest vulnerabilities and weakness. This man doesn't want to be president. He just wants to get his message out. He wants to become some sort of prophet, if you will, for the far left. But if he wanted, he had many different times to score points on her, and he let her off. I mean, they all look like straw men up there. The other three have no clue why they're in the race. And you come to the conclusion, or at least a suspicion, that they're there so they can have a debate and Hillary can get her showcase. Because without them, there's no debate.
Don't hold back, Nolan. Tell us how you really feel.
Well, that was my impression.
What was your impression?
I mean, I thought it was a really wonkish policy discussion in ways. I mean, I think lots of people were sitting there trying to Google the names of bills and ideas that they were talking about, because most people don't sit around thinking about things like Glass-Steagall, and that is a good thing. I mean, it does show that number one, you're right, the number of people makes a big difference in terms of
how was the viewership?
How much.
It was about 15. I think they said it was about 15 million people.
It was nowhere near the Republican debate.
That debate needed
well,
Donald
and
Trump.
But that's the
a
contrast,
show.
right?
That's entertainment. That's a variety show.
Now, the other side,
that is absolutely not fair. The Republican debate, aside from the Trump sideshow, you've got some. A good look at some candidates and their positions.
But they couldn't get a lot of time. They could not get enough time.
They're 16. They get a minute each.
Yeah, I mean, and all of the coverage of the Republican debates has been about who? Donald Trump, then Ben Carson, then Carly Fiorina, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, the people who I still believe.
They're getting a little bit more.
I still believe those are most likely
people
nominees.
Are watching the debate, so they are getting a chance. But I mean,
they're not coming up in the polls.
No.
I mean, they're at 6%.
I will have to say, Jim Webb did complain a number of times. He's like, they've been talking for a while. I hope I get my time. I'm like, you're wasting time complaining about that you're not getting time. Just enjoy it.
Say what you want to say.
You might as well go.
Well, and then he talks about killing people. Yeah. I mean,
I will say also, though, that Martin O'Malley, who I've known since he was a city councilman in Baltimore, but who I think has not done well so far in the campaign, acquitted himself very well in the debate and got some of his ideas out there. He seemed a little nervous at times, but I think that was the first real chance people got to see him and his ideas, and it's clear that he's somebody who, even if he doesn't do well this time, is looking down the road 4 years.
I mean, that was an easy night for her. The panelists didn't ask her about her controversies at all, didn't press her on the discrepancies in her stories on these various controversies. It was a very easy night, and her opponents didn't seem to want to engage at all, and so it wasn't so much. I didn't think it was so much of a debate as it was sort of.
Well, I think she did
what she needed to do to cement herself as the candidate. Because for weeks, everyone's like, well, is it really Hillary? And you better believe that the Vice President, Joe Biden, was sitting at home kind of watching to see if she was going to stumble on
it. That's a whole different night, because Biden would have went after her.
But that's also who she was really debating against, right? She's debating against the specter,
the shadow of
Biden
Joe Biden
getting into the race and saying, look, don't do that because I've got this handled. And I think she did enough probably to convince him of that.
She had it handled in a friendly crowd. Would be a far different debate if she had a real opponent opposite of her, and it would have been a different debate if Biden had been on the stage, because he would not have let her off so easy. He is a serious campaigner. If he gets in the race, she will have to do a lot more explaining than she had to do.
Do you really think that they let her off easy? Do you really think that Anderson Cooper did a bad job?
I don't think so.
He did.
What did he ask? One question about the email?
Well, most people, I know that in Republican circles that plays extremely well.
And independents, which is about 60%.
That plays extremely well. I think most people are much more concerned about the substantive issues they were talking about than they are about the emails. When Bernie Sanders said, I'm sick of hearing about your damn emails, I think he was channeling a lot of American sentiment.
He was channeling the Democratic base. Well, something's been bringing her poll numbers down, Steve.
It's not that.
And if people didn't care about these various scandals and her lack of veracity, her poll numbers wouldn't be plunging like this.
They do care. I don't think they care as much about that as they do about the others.
If you had a Joe Biden on the stage, a real opponent on the stage,
he would have gone after that stuff.
Bringing up the serious issues here and the serious concern here, for God's sakes, did anybody even mention mention the fact that she's under FBI investigation.
But Joe Biden is not. Joe Biden, who's a member of the same administration that she is not going to go after her about
if he gets in the race, he will.
Issues with these emails. How do you do that?
If he gets in the race, he will.
Well, again, this is something that she's going to have to answer, and that is going to be a tough go for her for the next several months, if not the next year or so. All right, moving on. This week, the Michigan legislature is taking on tiny particles that are posing a big threat to the Great Lakes. They're in products that we use every day, like facial scrubs and toothpaste, and they're called microbeads. So why do Michigan lawmakers care about what's in our hand sanitizer? Well, we're one of the last states around the Great Lakes Basin to consider a ban. Here's what you need to know. They're called microbeads, tiny particles of plastic in products that help scrub your skin, but they're ending up in the Great Lakes by the millions.
If you think about how many of these are being used daily and washed down the drain, it's quite staggering. This is something that impacts the ecosystem, the wildlife, by entangling fish and birds ingest these particles, and it impacts their health.
So how big is the problem in the Great Lakes? Scientists, like here at Loyola University in Chicago, have been taking water samples from rivers in and around Chicago and Lake Michigan. They found anywhere from 1,500 to 1.1 million microbeads per square mile in the Great Lakes.
What we're interested in doing is determining the concentration of microplastic that's in the rivers, determining the source of microplastic, and also the different types of these small plastic pieces that we find in the river.
The beads float on the surface, and fish often mistake them for food. The plastic is bad for fish health, but so are the microbes that the beads can carry. And the microbeads are so small, water treatment plants can't catch them. The plastics make their way through treated wastewater, which flows into sanitary canals and rivers, which go into the lakes.
Our initial findings from the North Shore Channel showed very high concentrations of microplastic downstream of a wastewater effluent source. And in fact, our concentrations were higher than what had been found in the ocean.
Now, Michigan is looking to join Illinois and 8 other states that have banned the manufacture and sale of personal care products that contain microplastics. There seems to be a hang-up in Lansing, though, over one word in the bill. It calls for a ban on products that have non-biodegradable microbeads. Environmental groups say there's no way to know how long it's acceptable to have microbeads break down in the environment. Forget the word non-biodegradable and just ban them all. The long-term impact of microbeads on the environment is unknown, but scientists are looking to see if they are carrying other organisms and chemicals.
One of the concerns is that the microbes on that plastic could be pathogenic. They might be disease-causing, and they may be kind of dispersed further in the environment on a plastic surface than they would on a natural surface.
The ban on microbeads would go into effect over the next few years. Many companies that make personal care products have already started voluntarily discontinuing the use of microbeads, but they're still trying to find a replacement product. Michigan lawmakers say they want to make what's already voluntary mandatory. Senator Debbie Stabenow and Senator Gary Peters are also trying at the federal level to ban microbeads. They introduced a bill in the spring. There's no traction on that yet, and we will watch Lansing to see what happens there next. And finally tonight, who can concentrate on news when everyone has sports on their brain? Because, well, I've got a little sports on the
nervous over
got
there.
a little sports on the brain. So it's a big game this weekend where the entire state divides down the middle. Some are green, some are blue.
Most are blue.
Some are in Kentucky and they don't really have a dog in this fight.
Basketball.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit fun to talk about the all eyes on the big house this weekend. You're not going to the game, but you'll be watching. You'll be
I'm gonna watch, and we'll see.
It's a new era. Why are you so smug over there?
I'm not smug. I'm just, everything looks really different today than it did 3 or 4 months ago, and I think that is the thrill of college football, right?
It's the magic of khaki pants on the sideline. So have things been changing over at U of M with the Jim Harbaugh era?
The greatest blessing of Jim Harbaugh is it's not Schembechler all the time like it has been for the last 20 years over there. I thought you said dig him up and stuff him and put him on the sidelines before those people would be satisfied. But, my favorite Jim Harbaugh story is that he has banned the trustees from the sidelines, or at least banned them from bringing hordes of people with them to the sidelines. And it's like Caesar and the senators, they loved him. And then all of a sudden, he's taking away say their perks, and they're like, wait, he can't do that. It's caused quite a bit of stir over there.
Well, there's serious work going on the sidelines, I guess. Well, you know, I'm a Michigan State grad, so I do bleed green and white. I think it's, you know, I think it's always fun that we all get so whipped up about sports in this state, and the fact that, you know, Detroit's one of the best sports towns I think around.
Well, Ann Arbor is.
Oh, God. See, and that's why people don't like Michigan fans, Stephen. I mean, that's why they've got kind of a problem.
You know,
That is true.
It is true. I mean, there's a sly smugness.
I think
It's not sly.
It's not sly.
I went into the season really rooting for State to do well this season because I think this is their best chance in my lifetime to go to the national championship and do those things. And I'm not a State fan when they play Michigan, but I am otherwise. But I think they've played so poorly.
They won every game.
They have, but I mean, just barely, and they
Christy,
have not
why
looked good
are they
against
falling in
inferior
the polls,
opponents.
even though they're winning?
Because they have not won big. But you know
Well,
what?
it's not just they're not won big.
Never underestimate the magic of D'Antonio and when they were spoiling for a good fight. And they like being the underdog, by the way.
We'll
they
see.
Like being the underdog. Hey, and by the way, what happened to the Lions? Isn't this such a shock?
No.
I know.
I think there's time for some sort of investigation, right? 50 years of futility deserves some.
An investigation?
If it was any other corporation
10 seconds.
in this town, we would be all over them trying to figure out why it failed so badly.
Well, you get on that. We'll get on. Stephen will get on that investigation of the Lions. And that's going to do it for MiWeek. Make sure you find us at MiWeek.org and on Facebook and Twitter. We appreciate the time that you spend here with us at Detroit Public Television. I'm Christy McDonald. We will be back here next week for MiWeek. So we'll see you then. Take care. Go green.
My favorite call.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Topics include trends that could affect your bottom line and how well Michigan is doing in attracting and growing good-paying jobs. A great lineup of speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta,